She shouted, she chased, she accused. But within just 27 seconds, in a hallway laced with tension and history, Marjorie Taylor Greene unraveled. And while cameras rolled and aides froze, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't raise her voice, didn't raise her hands, but somehow raised the entire tone of the nation. It was just one moment, one hallway. But for millions watching, it felt like something shifted. Because what happens when rage meets restraint, when provocation crashes into poise? And what does it say about our politics and ourselves when the loudest voice isn't the one that changes the room? This is the story of that moment, a dramatized account rooted in real events, crafted not to distort, but to explore the emotions we all carry in moments of injustice and confrontation. The names are real. The tension was real. And while this story imagines what could have unfolded behind the scenes, the questions it raises are ones we must all answer. So lean in, because sometimes the person who walks away is the one who ends up standing tallest. The Capitol didn't feel like a place for shouting. Not at that hour. Golden light spilled through the arched windows, casting long, sacred shadows across the polished marble floors. The air was heavy, not with noise, but with something quieter, older, the kind of silence that feels like it remembers things. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped through the chamber doors with a calm that almost contradicted the weight of the day. Her navy blazer fit perfectly over a white blouse, sleeves rolled just enough to show she wasn't here for theater. She was here for work. Her hair was tied back, neat, deliberate, and her eyes, focused forward, scanning something beyond the hall, as if she already knew what was coming. Behind her, footsteps, harder than usual, quicker. Then came a voice, sharp, guttural, unmistakable. "Hey, Alexandria!" She heard it. Of course she heard it. The acoustics of the Capitol weren't designed to hide things. They were designed to amplify them. A whisper becomes a ripple, a shout becomes thunder. Still, AOC didn't flinch. She didn't slow. She just kept walking. But the voice wasn't finished. "Hey, Alexandria!" The second call hit the air like a gavel slammed in anger. A group of aides paused near the statue alcove. A security officer stiffened by the eastern pillar. One camera phone came up, slowly, hesitantly, like it knew it was about to capture something that wasn't meant to be seen but couldn't be ignored. And then she appeared. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene rounded the corner like a storm breaking into daylight. Eyes locked, jaw tense, shoulders squared like a soldier marching into a battlefield of her own making. She wasn't just calling out. She was hunting. "Why won't you answer me?" she snapped, her voice echoing into the open dome above. "Why do you support Antifa? Why do you back terrorists?" The words weren't questions. They were accusations sharpened to wound. The kind meant not to engage, but to ignite. AOC kept her stride, not faster, not slower. Her left hand brushed the hem of her blazer, where a folded sheet of notes rested inside. Reminders for a committee session that would now surely be buried under headlines. But she still didn't turn around. Not when Greene accused her of being a coward. Not when she hurled socialist like a slur. Not even when she barked, "Debate me! What are you afraid of?" It was that silence, her silence, that made the moment electric. Because silence, in that marble hallway, didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like power withheld. It sounded like choice. And in that stillness, something strange happened. For the briefest second, you could see it, even in Greene's expression. Not victory, not control, but something far less expected. Doubt. Just a flicker, a crack. Gone in an instant, swallowed by the fury she kept fueling. But it was there, and that's what made the bystanders freeze. Not the shouting. They'd heard shouting before. It was the realization that this wasn't two women fighting. This was one woman shouting into an echo, and the other refusing to give it a name. A staffer muttered under her breath, "Is she really going to just walk through it?" She did. AOC reached the end of the corridor. She never turned. She never blinked. The marble caught the last of the golden sunlight as the door closed behind her. Soft, soundless, absolute. And in the space she left behind, Greene was still speaking, but the echo, It was gone. The footsteps grew louder. Not just Greene's, but the hesitant scuffles of others. Staffers drawn by the heat of something they didn't yet understand. Phones came up now more confidently. Eyes shifted over shoulders. Some whispers began. The air had changed. It no longer felt like a hallway. It felt like a stage. Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't miss a beat. She closed the distance like she had rehearsed this. Not just the lines, but the posture, the venom, the timing. "Why do you support Antifa, huh?" she barked, her voice cutting through the stillness like steel dragging across stone. "Why do you stand with Black Lives Matter rioters?" Her tone wasn't asking. It was judging, sentencing, shouting the verdict before the trial began. She didn't even blink at the absurdity. To her, Antifa and BLM weren't movements or protests. They were easy, loaded words, reshaped to fit her script. Chaos, fire, threat. Words that triggered fear in those who already needed someone to blame. She hurled them like stones, each one laced with a smirk of righteous fury. "They're terrorist groups, and you stand with them. Don't you, Alexandria?" Still no answer. AOC moved like a woman who had already measured the noise and deemed it unworthy of weight. Her pace never changed. Her shoulders didn't rise. Her head didn't turn. She was walking not away from Greene, but toward something else. Something larger than this moment, this hallway, this voice trying to own it. A junior reporter stepped out from a side door, half stunned. A congressional aide froze beside a bust of Frederick Douglass. They knew this was different, not because Greene was shouting, that was routine, but because Ocasio-Cortez wasn't giving it oxygen, and somehow that made it burn hotter. "Don't walk away," Greene snapped, desperation now bleeding through the anger. "If you're not a coward, then debate me. Defend your radical socialist garbage to the American people. Come on, let's go, you and me. Anywhere, anytime." There was something theatrical about it, but also something deeply personal. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about presence. Greene needed AOC to turn around, to snap, to validate the stage. But AOC kept moving, every step a denial, every silence a rejection louder than any scream. The moment stretched, not in seconds, but in meaning. It wasn't just Greene shouting into the rotunda now. It was history echoing back. Every woman who'd ever been expected to justify her anger. Every person of color who'd been baited into a stereotype. Every leader told that silence was weakness. And here was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, proving that it could be power. Greene's voice faltered for a split second, barely, before she pushed again. "Why don't you answer me? Why are you afraid to face me?" Her tone cracked, not enough for her base to notice, but enough for the people in that hallway to feel it. A camera flashed, a pen scratched against a notepad. No one said a word. And AOC? She reached the elevator, pressed the button, waited. In the golden light of the Capitol, with eyes all around and accusation still filling the air, she stood still, her face unreadable, her hands steady at her sides. The doors opened, she stepped in. No rebuttal, no glance, no signal. Only the quiet and the closing of silver doors, and the weight of 100 unanswered words hanging in the space where a shout had just lived. The elevator doors slid shut with a quiet hiss, muting the hallway noise like a curtain falling at the end of a scene. Inside, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood still, not composed out of instinct, but intention. Her breathing was slow, her eyes focused on the seam between the elevator panels. The silence wasn't empty, it pulsed. Her mind wasn't racing, it was sorting, measuring. What had just happened wasn't an ambush. It was a mirror, and she'd chosen not to look in it. When she reached her office, her team was already waiting. 3 staffers at the long table, one holding a tablet, another still scrolling Twitter, her chief of staff with a notepad in hand and an expression that said more than words ever could. "She's trending already," someone said quietly, turning the screen toward AOC. 3 different angles of her shouting, 2 clips cut with dramatic music, one with subtitles in all caps. Alexandria didn't look. Not yet. She moved to the window instead, pulling back the curtain just slightly, eyes landing on the flags outside, barely moving in the heavy DC air. Silence settled in the room. It wasn't tense. It was suspended, as if everyone knew the question was coming, but no one wanted to be the one to break the stillness. Finally, someone did. "Should we respond?" The words landed gently but firmly, like a pebble dropped into deep water. AOC turned from the window, slowly, deliberately. Her gaze swept the room, not confrontational, not uncertain, just grounded. She sat down, hands folded, her voice calm but clear. "Not every fire deserves fuel." No follow-up, no clarification, just that. The room took a breath. One of the aides nodded, the kind of nod you give when you're not sure whether it's wisdom or a missed opportunity, but you trust it anyway. Outside the office walls, the digital wildfire was already raging. The confrontation had hit the internet like a spark in a dry field. Headlines spun, commentators picked sides. Conspiracy channels shouted vindication while satire accounts turned Greene's voice into remixed anthems. But in AOC's office, the energy was different, tethered, focused. One staffer looked up again. "You know she's going to keep going, right? More videos, more bait." Alexandria didn't smile, but there was a trace of something close to it in her eyes. Not amusement, not defiance, something steadier. She glanced at her calendar, then at her notes still tucked in the inside pocket of her blazer. She had policy meetings in the morning, a town hall on Thursday, climate legislation on the floor by next week. "She wants chaos," AOC said finally, her tone low, almost to herself. "We'll give them clarity." Outside, the Capitol glowed in the last light of the day. Online, the views climbed past 4 million, and in a corner of a quiet office, a woman who had just walked through a storm, without raising her voice, poured herself a glass of water, sat down at her desk, and got back to work. The ring light flared to life like a camera flash trapped in stillness. In front of it, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned forward, lips pressed in a tight line that was half smirk, half sneer. She adjusted the angle of her phone, then stared directly into the lens, not just speaking to her audience, but commanding it. "She ran," Greene said, voice dripping with contempt. "She ran from me, from you, from the truth it wasn't scripted, not formally." But Greene didn't need teleprompters. Her talking points were baked into instinct. Sharp, simple, weaponized. She knew exactly which words to fire and when to reload. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doesn't want debate. She doesn't want discussion. She wants power without accountability. And she's too much of a coward to stand face-to-face with someone who's not afraid of her radical agenda. The comments began flooding in before she even finished her second sentence. Heart emojis, American flags, fire symbols. "Preach it, Queen." "Finally, someone's got guts." "AOC is a joke." The chat box became a frenzy of affirmation and anger. Greene thrived on both. She leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was letting her audience in on something sacred. "I said what no one else would say. She's backing terrorists, Antifa, Black Lives Matter. They want to burn this country down, and she stands with them." Donations began streaming in. Greene had a system. Below the live stream window was a quick pay link. Red, bold, pulsing. "Help me take the truth to the floor," it read. The money came fast. $5, $10, $50, more. Notifications ticked upward in the corner of her screen. It wasn't just a video, it was a performance. And her audience? It wasn't just watching, it was participating. They weren't supporters. They were soldiers. Digital foot soldiers in a war Greene insisted was being waged by liberals, by elites, by the very woman who had walked away from her 20 minutes earlier. But somewhere around minute 6, the tempo shifted. Subtly. Buried between the floods of support came a different kind of comment. "Why are you always going after her?" one asked. "Isn't there other stuff we should be focusing on?" said another. A third simply read, "This again?" Greene didn't flinch, not visibly, but her eyes flicked to the corner of the screen where the comments slid upward and lingered half a second too long. The flood of praise drowned out the dissent quickly, but it had been there. It had landed, and she'd seen it. Her voice lifted again, sharper now. You don't win a war by sitting on the sidelines, she snapped. You fight. That's what I'm doing. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to stop people like AOC from destroying the values that make America great. The camera caught the gleam of sweat beginning to form just above her temple. The ring light, now harsh, made the shadows on her face deepen. The live stream ticked past 10 minutes. Tens of thousands of viewers, thousands of shares, more money, more fuel. But somewhere beneath the surface, buried under the algorithms and applause, a new rhythm began to beat. The beginning of a question, faint but persistent. If you keep chasing someone who never answers, what does that make you? Greene ended the stream with her usual sign-off. Truth doesn't apologize, then tapped the screen. The ring light shut off. And for the first time all day, the room was quiet. The screen flickered to life again, this time not in a basement live stream, but on a polished studio monitor in New York, then another in Atlanta, and another in a mid-sized production suite in Texas. Editors, researchers, and producers moved quickly. The Capitol hallway clip had opened a fresh lane of inquiry. Not just what Greene had said today, but what she had always said. And so, the archives began to hum. The first cut was grainy, pulled from an old Facebook Live post. Greene's voice, younger but just as sharp, came through the speaker. Yes, I said it. It's an Islamic invasion of our government. And if you don't see it, you're not paying attention. The image jump cut to another angle, a now infamous tweet, frozen on screen like an exhibit at trial. BLM is a violent organization. Full stop. They want to rip this country apart. Then came the quote that would haunt her for years. A wild-eyed Greene speaking into a cell phone camera, standing in front of dry brush and smoke-streaked hills in California. There's a theory, she began, that these wildfires aren't just natural, that they're started by laser beams from space, funded by a prominent Jewish banking family. The camera zoomed slightly as her voice dropped conspiratorially. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Back in the studio, the editors didn't add music. They didn't need to. The silence between each clip did the work, like footsteps leading towards something you couldn't yet see, but felt. The next montage ran on a late-night news cycle. Greene defending Matt Gaetz just weeks after accusations surfaced of sex trafficking involving a minor. I stand by my friend. Innocent until proven guilty. This is just another witch hunt. The headline below blared, Marjorie Taylor Greene doubles down as ethics questions grow. The clips ran on loop. Some anchors simply played them with a raised eyebrow. Others editorialized more boldly. This isn't politics, it's performance rage, one said. And it's starting to wear thin, even with her base. By morning, something subtle began to shift. A conservative commentator on a morning talk show cleared his throat before speaking. Look, I've defended Marjorie in the past. I believe in calling out the radical left, I really do. But chasing colleagues down the hallway, screaming at them, that's not leadership. That's theater. Another right-leaning strategist tweeted cautiously, the GOP can't win independence if our most visible voices are stuck in attack mode 24/7. There's a difference between passion and obsession. Nobody named her directly, not yet. But in political circles, omission is as loud as a headline. Booker stopped returning calls. A segment Greene was scheduled to appear on was suddenly rescheduled for next week. A donor event she'd promoted in Dallas was quietly pulled from the calendar. And inside her own team, the shift was felt too. Her communications director refreshed Twitter 5 times in 30 minutes, staring at a quote tweet from a former ally. Marjorie used to stand for something. Now she just screams into hallways. It wasn't mutiny, it wasn't collapse, but it was a crack. And in politics, cracks don't stay still. They grow. Greene, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the gathering shift, recorded another short video later that afternoon, trying to pivot the focus back to AOC's cowardice. But the momentum had already begun to drift. Because when the record plays back too many times, even the familiar hits begin to lose their power. And this time, America wasn't just watching, it was remembering. The letter began like a whisper on parchment, respectful, measured, but unmistakably firm. This is no longer a political disagreement. We can't call this politics. It's harassment, sustained, intentional, and dangerous. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat alone at her desk long after the building had emptied. The office lights were low, the city outside bathed in a quiet that didn't quite match the headlines swirling around her name. Her pen moved deliberately, every word selected with care, not as a weapon, but as a line in the sand. She wasn't naming Marjorie Taylor Greene in anger. She wasn't even writing the letter to satisfy the media storm outside. She was writing it because something had cracked, not in her, but in the institution around her. What happened in the hallway was not the first incident, the letter continued, and unless leadership acts, it won't be the last. By morning, copies were in the hands of the Speaker's office, the minority leader, the sergeant-at-arms. But before they could even issue a formal response, the letter had done something no soundbite ever could. It created a ripple of recognition. Cori Bush was the first to respond, quietly in a group message shared between a small circle of progressive lawmakers. Her reply came without flourish, just a single line. "She cornered me in the tunnel last year. I didn't say anything. I thought it was just me." Ilhan Omar followed a few minutes later. "I remember her filming me outside my office. She said I didn't look American. I kept walking." Then another message. "It's always when there are no cameras she goes the hardest." Within hours, more names joined. Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib. Staffers who asked not to be named but described hallway altercations, confrontations outside elevators, sarcastic mocking across committee rooms. No shouting matches, just steady erosion. Moments that were easy to brush off until they began to accumulate like bruises beneath long sleeves. The letter didn't call for punishment. It called for protection. It didn't scream. It stood. And then, just as AOC was walking into her first policy meeting of the day, the letter leaked. The full text landed on the front page of Politico by noon. By 3 p.m., it was a top story on CNN. The New York Times ran it with the headline, "Ocasio-Cortez urges leadership to rein in harassment on the Hill." But it wasn't the media's reaction that mattered. It was the public's. Teachers wrote in, nurses, veterans. One retired police chief from Ohio commented under the article, "I don't always agree with her, but she's right. This ain't politics. This is bullying dressed up in a flag." And for the first time, Greene's voice was drowned out, not by silence, but by reason. There was no dramatic speech, no press conference, no tear-filled moment on camera. Just a printed letter, carried hand to hand, screen to screen, across a country that knew the difference between a debate and an ambush. And in a building known for echoing voices, one written paragraph had done what no shouted accusation ever could. It made people stop and ask, when did we decide this was normal? The projector clicked on with a soft hum, casting a frozen image onto the pull-down screen at the front of room 214. The frame showed the familiar marble corridor of the Capitol and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walking steadily forward, her back turned to the camera, as a red-faced Marjorie Taylor Greene pointed and shouted just steps behind her. Ms. Ellison, a civics teacher with 20 years in the district, stood off to the side of the screen, arms gently crossed. Her lesson plan had originally included a segment on legislative process, maybe a worksheet on how a bill becomes law. But after the hallway video went viral, one of her students sent it to the class group chat with a single caption, "Yo, this how Congress acts." So today the plan had changed. The video played through again, this time with the volume up. Greene's voice echoed through the speakers. "Why do you support Antifa? Why do you back terrorists?" The room of juniors and seniors stayed unusually quiet. Phones were down. Even the usual back row whisperers were watching. When the clip ended, the screen froze again. AOC at the elevator, pressing the button, surrounded by stares, shouts, and tension. Ms. Ellison cleared her throat. "Okay, so, thoughts?" A few hands went up hesitantly. One student said it felt like bullying. Another asked if politicians were allowed to behave like that without consequence. A third said, "It's just performative stuff, right? Like for social media clout." There were nods. Then from the second row, a hand rose that usually didn't. Jalen was quiet, observant, a 17-year-old black student who kept to himself, but whose essays always came in with thoughtfulness and weight. He didn't ask questions often, But when he did, the room usually stopped to listen. His voice was calm but unshakable. "If she's a terrorist to them," he said, nodding toward AOC's image, "then what does that make me?" The silence that followed was heavier than any lecture. Miss Ellison blinked, mouth slightly open. She didn't answer right away. She couldn't, because the question wasn't rhetorical. It was a mirror. It wasn't just about Ocasio-Cortez or Greene anymore. It was about every stereotype Jalen had walked through, every stare he'd received, every unspoken assumption hanging in the air when he wore a hoodie or raised his voice or spoke with conviction. She started to speak, then stopped, then tried again. "I don't think it makes you anything other than who you are," she said slowly. "But I also know that's not always how people see it, and that's the problem." Jalen nodded once, not as approval, but as acknowledgement. He knew she didn't have the answer. She knew he didn't expect one. But it had been said. It was in the room now. Another student shifted in their chair. "It's like when you look like her," they said, pointing to the pause frame of AOC, "you're never allowed to be loud without being labeled dangerous." Ms. Ellison nodded. "Or angry without being labeled unstable, or passionate without being called unprofessional." The bell rang not long after, but no one moved at first. A few students sat quietly, eyes lingering on the screen. The hallway scene had ended hours ago in real life, but here, inside this room, in this moment, it was still unfolding. Because what had started as a headline was now a conversation, and what had once been just another viral clip had cracked something open that wasn't easy to close again. The day had been long, not in hours but in wait. Alexandria sat curled on the couch in her apartment, hair pulled into a loose knot, a half-eaten salad on the coffee table in front of her. The news was still looping in the background. Clips of the Capitol confrontation, commentary from both sides, a never-ending scroll of judgment dressed up as analysis. She picked up her phone, stared at it for a moment, then tapped the screen. Her mother answered on the third ring. "Hola, mija," came the familiar voice, soft and steady. "Hey, mama," AOC said quietly. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course. What's going on?" Alexandria hesitated. The silence wasn't heavy. It was searching. She could face down corporate lobbyists, hostile media panels, congressional interrogations. But somehow this moment, this call, required more courage than any of that. "They're calling me a coward," she said finally, "for not shouting back, for walking away." Her mother was quiet for a beat. Then, "Who's calling you that?" "Commentators, pundits, some of my own supporters, even people I don't know, just strangers with loud keyboards. They say I let her win." The older woman's voice didn't rise. It didn't soften either. It simply held. "Let me ask you something," she said gently. "When you were little, do you remember the first time you stood up in front of a crowd?" Alexandria smiled despite herself. "You mean the school speech?" "Yes, third grade. You wore those red sneakers you loved and stood on that milk crate they gave you because you were too short to reach the microphone." "I was terrified," AOC said, her voice warming. "My hands were shaking so bad I thought I'd drop the cue cards." "But you didn't," her mother said. "You looked out at that auditorium and you said every word with that little voice of yours. You didn't shout. You didn't cry. You just said what you came to say." Alexandria let the silence stretch a little, remembering the smell of the school gym, the sound of folding chairs, her heart thudding louder than the applause. "You don't owe them rage, mija," her mother said softly. "You owe them purpose, and you gave it to them. By not shouting back, you showed them something they didn't expect. That strength doesn't always make noise." AOC leaned her head back, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. Sometimes I wonder if silence is enough." "Silence isn't nothing," her mother replied. "Silence is choice, and that choice can speak louder than any microphone if the moment is right." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The TV in the background played another segment, Greene on a podcast, voice raised, full of fury. Alexandria reached for the remote and muted it. "Mama? See? Thanks for letting me be that little girl in red sneakers for a few more minutes." "You're still her," her mother said, "but now more people are watching." They ended the call quietly, no grand goodbye. Just love, tucked between words, And as the apartment settled into stillness, AOC returned to her notes on the table. Drafts of legislation, town hall questions, floor remarks, no headlines, no cameras, just purpose. The envelope was light, no official seal, no typed address label, just a small, slightly wrinkled white envelope with "to AOC" written in big, careful block letters and a return address from Detroit, Michigan. It arrived on a Monday morning, tucked between policy briefings and manila folders marked urgent. Her staff assistant nearly missed it in the shuffle. But something about the handwriting, the lopsided stamp, the smudge of marker on the corner, it made her stop and place it gently on Alexandria's desk. When AOC returned from a budget hearing that afternoon, the letter was waiting, unopened, unsorted, untouched. She noticed it immediately. Something about it felt out of place in a building that ran on structure and order. She peeled it open slowly, as if the paper might whisper something if she handled it gently enough. Inside, there was no formal greeting, no long message, just a short note written in pencil on wide-ruled paper. "Dear AOC, I saw the video. My dad said you didn't say anything because you were scared, but I don't think that's true. You walked away, but you looked strong. Love, Amira, age 8. Folded around the letter was a drawing. Crayon on construction paper, bright blue for the hallway, dark brown for the floor, a yellow elevator door at the end. And in the center, 2 stick figures. One, smaller, walking calmly forward in a dark blue dress. The other, bigger, arms raised mid-yell, scribbled in red. Above them, a label drawn in a careful, childlike hand. You. The mean lady." Alexandria stared at it for a long time. The colors weren't perfect. The proportions were off. But the truth of it was unmistakable. In this child's eyes, there had been no cowardice, no weakness, just clarity, grace. She didn't say a word to anyone. She stood up, walked to the far side of her office, and pinned the drawing to the corkboard above her desk. No frame, no caption, just tacked gently in place, next to a small note her father had written her before he passed. "Speak when it matters. Listen when it's hardest." The drawing didn't match the rest of her office. All policy briefs, whiteboards, clean lines. But it stayed. Throughout the week, staffers came and went, noticing it but never asking. It didn't need to be explained. In a place where everything was designed to be seen and spun, here was something that existed just to remind her of the kind of strength no headline could define. Sometimes late in the afternoon, when the light hit the window just right, the crayon colors glowed like stained glass. And on the hardest days when the noise of outrage bled through every screen and silence felt like a risk, not a choice, she'd look at it, just briefly, just enough. And then, quietly, she'd smile. The invitation came with all the formality of a presidential forum. Gold-embossed letterhead, a neutral tone, and a carefully worded promise of balance. The hosting organization was well-respected, nonpartisan, nationally recognized, with a reputation for civil discourse and primetime reach. The event was to be aired live from a D.C. auditorium with 2 podiums, 1 moderator, and millions of eyes waiting. The topic was broad: national unity, political accountability, and what leadership looks like in divided times. But everyone knew what it was really about. AOC versus MTG. The headlines wrote themselves. Ideological fireworks. Left versus right, round 1. Cable networks spun up countdowns. Online forums debated rules before either side had agreed. And when Greene quickly confirmed her participation, the frenzy deepened. "She's scared," MTG declared on national television. "Flat out terrified. That's why she won't debate me. Because she knows I'll expose her for what she really is. A puppet of Marxist radicals with nothing but slogans and empty sound bites." She said it into the camera with such certainty that even the anchor didn't bother to push back. The clip ran in loops across multiple networks. The phrase "AOC scared to debate" trended for 36 hours straight. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez never flinched. Her office released a single written statement. "My role as a legislator is to represent, not to entertain. I will not legitimize a platform built on conspiracy and cruelty by treating it as a debate." She didn't elaborate. She didn't respond to the noise. She went back to work. Still, the organization moved forward with the event. The venue was booked. The moderator prepped. Both podiums were placed precisely 12 feet apart, framed by twin American flags in the warm glow of stage lights. The air buzzed with anticipation as guests filed into their seats. Greene arrived early, dressed in red, a bold lapel pin gleaming under the lights. She smiled for the cameras, waved to the crowd, shook hands with staff. Then she took her place behind her podium, flipping through her notes as though she'd trained for this her whole life. To her left, the second podium remained empty. No backup speaker, no stand-in, just silence. The camera operators hesitated, unsure how long to hold the wide shot. The moderator, to his credit, kept his voice measured. Tonight, we invited both Congresswoman Greene and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to participate in this forum. Representative Ocasio-Cortez declined. We will proceed with questions for the participating guest. Greene forced a laugh. Of course she declined. Truth's a hard thing to stand next to, especially when you don't have any. But something was off. The audience wasn't clapping. The silence in the room wasn't tense. It was thoughtful. The empty podium didn't look like surrender. It looked like a boundary, a line visibly drawn that told the crowd not everything needed to be answered in the same room as a microphone. Midway through the broadcast, a side-angle camera panned across the stage. Greene was talking, loud, gesturing, confident, but the frame held the second podium in view, still untouched, still waiting. By the end of the night, that image, not her words, was what went viral. Two podiums, one voice, and the question that began to rise in comment sections, classrooms, and living rooms across the country. What does it mean when the loudest person in the room is also the only one there? It didn't begin with fanfare. No press release, no viral video, no production crew. Just a post on a personal blog maintained by a retired U.S. Marine in Charleston, South Carolina. His name was Harold Vincent, 68 years old with 3 tours in Iraq, 2 knee replacements, and a voice that didn't often reach beyond his local VFW hall. But this time it did. The title was simple: I've seen courage. It's not volume, it's clarity. The letter began like a handshake, firm, direct, unmistakably sincere. I served this country for 27 years. I've led young men into gunfire, held the hands of soldiers who didn't make it home, and stood at attention while others took credit for our sacrifice. I know what courage looks like. And this week, I didn't see it behind a podium. I saw it in a hallway, where one woman walked forward while another screamed behind her. Vincent hadn't planned to write anything. He wasn't registered as a Democrat, and truth be told, he hadn't agreed with much of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's platform. But something about the image of her, walking in silence, holding her ground without raising her voice, stirred something in him he hadn't expected. In the military, we're taught to respond to threats, but we're also taught to recognize noise for what it is. There's a difference between conflict and chaos. The first is necessary, the second is destructive. What I saw this week wasn't a debate, it was a provocation, and AOC didn't take the bait. That takes more discipline than most people will ever understand. By the time the post reached its final paragraph, it was already being shared on veterans forums and social media pages across the country. To those who say she's weak, ask yourself, why do you need a woman to scream to believe she's strong? Within 24 hours, the blog post had been republished in full by Task and Purpose. By 48 hours, Veterans for Truth, a bipartisan organization of former service members, issued a rare public endorsement. We stand with Congressman Vincent's statement. Strength comes in many forms, and silence in the face of harassment is not weakness. It's discipline, it's restraint, it's courage. The letter gained momentum. News anchors read it on air. Talk shows quoted it. AOC didn't comment publicly, but her team quietly confirmed she had read it and that she'd asked for a printed copy to be framed in her office. When Marjorie Taylor Greene was asked about the letter during a live radio segment, her response was curt and cutting. "Oh, please," she said with a laugh. "Another old man who doesn't get it. He's clearly been watching too much CNN. If he thinks ignoring terrorists is brave, maybe he's the one who needs to retire again." The clip was clipped, captioned, and posted within minutes. But this time, the reaction didn't go her way. Republican veterans pushed back. A conservative columnist from the National Review tweeted, "Disrespecting a Marine with 3 decades of service for defending civility? That's a bad move, even for her." The rift wasn't seismic, but it was spreading, quietly, persistently, like the slow, steady separation of fault lines that had long been under pressure. Because the letter hadn't just defended AOC, it had reframed the entire question. And now Americans weren't asking whether she was afraid. They were asking why so many people needed her to yell in order to believe she was brave. The House chamber wasn't packed, but it didn't need to be. The cameras were rolling. The press gallery was half full. A few members leaned back in their seats, glancing at their phones, expecting another routine floor remark. But when Representative Cori Bush of Missouri stood up and adjusted the mic, something shifted. There was no paper in her hands, no aide whispering last-minute notes. Just her, steady at the podium, breathing deep before she spoke. "I rise today," she began, "not just as a member of this body, but as a woman who knows what it's like to be followed while Black, shouted at while Black, accused, diminished, silenced, erased, and then blamed for not reacting the way someone else wanted." The room quieted. I watched what happened in that hallway. We all did. We all saw a colleague, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, face down a storm of accusation, venom, and bait, and she met it with composure, with dignity, with silence. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, not combative, but firm, centered. And somehow that's the part being criticized? Murmurs shifted. Phones were lowered. Bush continued, voice tightening, not with anger, but memory. "There was a time when I was told, 'Don't let them see you break.' When I was a nurse, when I was a pastor, when I was unhoused, when I was a mother crying in a hospital hallway. And now even here, inside these marble walls, I'm told to keep calm while someone else loses control." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn note card. Edges bent, ink faded. "I carry this with me every day," she said. "Dr. King said, 'We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools.' And today I want to ask this chamber, are we living together as brothers? Or are we rehearsing the same old script of noise over substance, spectacle over service?" Her voice cracked on the final line. Not a breakdown, but a truth too heavy to carry without strain. She looked down for a second, regained herself, then met the room again. "I'm proud of my sister in service," she said, "not for walking away, but for walking through it, for not returning fire when provoked, for refusing to treat an insult like it deserved a seat at the table." No applause, just silence. The kind that meant something had landed. A few members nodded. Others looked down at their desks, not in defiance, but reflection. Across the aisle, even a handful of Republicans didn't move. The chamber, so often filled with procedural noise, now felt like it had inhaled and didn't know how to exhale just yet. Cori Bush stepped back from the podium. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered the microphone. She didn't wait for validation. She didn't need it. Outside, the clip would circulate within the hour. News outlets would highlight the MLK quote. Social media would fixate on the crack in her voice. But inside that room, the message was simpler. This wasn't about volume anymore. It was about truth, and who had the courage to carry it without shouting. The meeting wasn't on the official calendar. It didn't have a press release, a podium, or a hashtag. It happened behind a set of closed doors in the back of a Capitol Hill office. Just after sunset, when most reporters had gone home, and the echo of footsteps down the marble halls had gone quiet. Marjorie Taylor Greene walked in thinking she was going to speak. Instead, she was handed a seat in silence. Across the table sat 3 senior GOP members, veterans of the House, pragmatic operators, not firebrands but survivors. The kind who remembered when the party was built on strategy, not slogans. "Marjorie," one of them said, leaning forward, voice low but clear, "you're hurting the brand." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were the kind of sentence that came after polls, after donor calls, after meetings with consultants who use phrases like optics and swing state fatigue. "What brand?" Greene snapped, her voice rising instantly. "The one that sits quiet while the left walks all over us? The one that hides while I take the heat for saying what you're all thinking?" You're not saying what we're thinking, another member replied coldly. You're saying what plays on YouTube and calling it a platform. The tension snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. Greene stood up, fists clenched at her sides. Oh, I get it. This is the Rhino Circle, she hissed. This is where you pat each other on the back and play nice while the country burns. You want to win votes with bipartisanship? I want to win with the truth. One of the men sighed, not in frustration but fatigue. You're not winning anything, he said flatly. You're trending. That's not the same. Greene didn't stay much longer after that. She stormed out without shaking hands, muttering about betrayal and cowards in ties. Her staff trailed behind her, faces unreadable. Outside, the air was thick and still. Cameras weren't waiting. Reporters hadn't caught wind. But something in her expression had changed. Not rage, not indignation. Something tighter, edgier. The kind of heat that comes not from being attacked, but from being dismissed. Later that night, a clip aired on a conservative news show, known more for commentary than loyalty. The host played Greene's most recent hallway rant, then paused, eyebrows raised. I don't know, folks, he said into the camera. I believe in fighting for America, but sometimes you gotta ask, who are you fighting for? And are you winning or just yelling? The segment was short, just 3 minutes, but it made the rounds. The next morning, Greene opened her inbox to find a handful of fundraising emails returned with terse replies. We're reevaluating. Not the direction we're looking for. Let's touch base after the quarter. By the end of the week, she'd lost a spot on an invitation-only panel at a high-profile donor summit. No reason given. Just scheduling issues. No one said it outright. No one exiled her. But the distance grew. A hesitation in greetings, fewer interview requests, a whisper campaign not of opposition, but of fatigue. Greene doubled down in public, of course. She posted fiery clips, launched another live stream, declared war on the traitors within. But behind the scenes, the current had begun to shift. Because even among allies, there is a limit. And in the quiet spaces where power really moved, Marjorie Taylor Greene had become, slowly but undeniably, a liability. While headlines still screamed and comment threads burned red with outrage, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was working quietly on something else entirely. No press conference, no sharp rebuttals, just a simple campaign rollout, posted without warning on her official page late one Thursday morning. The video opened with a close-up of her face. No makeup team, no flag backdrop, just natural light filtering through a nearby window. Her voice was steady. This isn't about being loud. This is about being clear, and it's time to reclaim what leadership is supposed to sound like. The screen faded to black. White text appeared. Not louder, just stronger. The phrase became the anchor of what would soon be called her Civility and Truth campaign, a nationwide push to bring attention to how much energy was being wasted on personal attacks, conspiracy rhetoric, and performative shouting matches. But AOC didn't frame it as a crusade against anyone in particular. In fact, she refused to mention Marjorie Taylor Greene by name at all. It's not about individual, she told her team. It's about the culture that rewards cruelty over clarity. The first wave of PSA-style videos followed days later. Short, striking clips showing young people disengaging from politics because of the noise, paired with testimonials from voters who said they no longer felt represented by the screaming on both sides. One woman said, I turn off the news because it feels like high school with more expensive microphones. Another, I want policy, not personality contests. The final tagline echoed, not louder, just stronger. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Instead of cable shows, AOC took the message to where she believed it mattered most: college campuses, community centers, and town halls. Her team called them small room stops, and the first was at a university in Ohio with folding chairs and a modest podium. No fanfare, just face-to-face conversation. She walked into each space without entourage, stood in front of students and young organizers, and asked one question: what would make you believe in politics again? The responses varied, some hopeful, some bitter. But all of them were real, and Alexandria didn't give speeches. She listened. She nodded. She answered when asked. Sometimes the events didn't even make the news, but they were live-streamed, shared by students, posted in Instagram stories and Twitter threads with captions like, "She didn't yell once, but she still filled the room." In Vermont, a pre-law student said afterward, "This is the first time I didn't feel like I was being sold something." In Georgia, a first-generation voter whispered, "She reminded me of my mom, just calm, but no nonsense." The quiet campaign began to grow, not in money, but in momentum. High school civics clubs wrote in asking for materials. Veterans groups reached out to host joint events. Retired teachers offered to volunteer. And all the while, AOC kept moving, campus to campus, district to district, microphone to microphone, not raising her voice, just making space for others to use theirs. Her team tracked the analytics, of course, but what they noticed most wasn't the data, it was the tone. Less cynicism, more questions, less fire, more light. And in the swirl of a political moment obsessed with sound and fury, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was building something far more difficult to headline, but far more lasting, a following without a fight. The blinds in Marjorie Taylor Greene's office were half drawn, casting striped shadows across the carpet. The overhead lights were off, leaving only the dim glow from 2 desk lamps and the soft blue tint of computer monitors. Outside, footsteps echoed down the hall, busy, brisk, purposeful, but inside everything was still. Greene sat at her desk, arms crossed tightly, eyes unfocused as her team quietly moved around her. No one spoke unless necessary. The air felt dry, stale, as if too many words had been spoken in this room already. On the far end of the desk, a half-eaten protein bar sat untouched. A stack of printouts, polling numbers, talking points, a donor retraction notice, lay slightly curled at the edges. Across from her, her communications director stared blankly at a laptop screen, refreshing a social feed that wasn't moving fast anymore. Another aide thumbed through a legal pad of notes that had already been crossed out, rewritten, and abandoned. The tension wasn't explosive, it was tired. The office line rang. Everyone froze for half a beat, as if unsure whether to answer. One of the aides reached for it, but Greene raised her hand. "I've got it," she said, her voice low, dry, almost hoarse. She picked up the receiver. "This is Congresswoman Greene." She listened. The call was short, maybe 40 seconds. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed the longer she listened. Then, without a word, she slammed the receiver down so hard the sound made both aides flinch. "They want me to do another debate," she muttered. "Some university panel in Florida. Neutral setting, big audience." No one responded. "I'm not giving them a stage," she snapped, though no one had suggested she should. "I'm not letting them twist my words again. I've said what I need to say. If they can't handle it, that's not my problem." Still silence. Her staff didn't challenge her. They'd tried. In earlier weeks, after the hallway clip went viral, after the letter from the veteran began circulating, they'd attempted gentle nudges, softer language in press releases, a different tone in interviews, suggestions to pivot to policy or district issues. Each time they were shut down. Now they simply waited. Greene leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temple with 2 fingers. Her fire hadn't disappeared, but it had cooled. Not extinguished, but dimmed, and in the faint light of her office, the absence of noise felt almost foreign. For the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked uncertain. The kind of uncertainty that creeps in when applause fades and the spotlight turns a little too harsh, when shouting begins to echo back hollow, when even your own voice starts to sound like something rehearsed. She glanced at the phone again, then out the window where the Capitol dome glowed softly in the night. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers drummed on the edge of her desk, searching for something to grab onto. But there was nothing left to grip. And in that still room, with tired staff, dim lights, and no cameras rolling, Marjorie Taylor Greene sat back, said nothing, and, for the first time in weeks, looked like she didn't know what to say next. The chamber wasn't full, but it felt full. Not because of the number of people, but because of the anticipation, the kind that hums quietly between seatbacks and whispered conversations. where everyone pretends to be reading notes but isn't, where even the marble seems to lean in. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered without a security detail or entourage. She moved with the same deliberate calm that had become her signature in recent weeks. A navy blazer, a single pen in her hand, no stack of paper, no staffer trailing behind. She paused briefly at the back of the chamber, eyes scanning the room. A few heads turned, a few more straightened in their seats. It had been nearly a month since her last public speech on the House floor. In that time, others had spoken for her, about her, around her. She had stayed quiet, not out of retreat, but to make space. And now she was stepping back into the space they had tried to define for her. She approached the microphone. The gavel had just come down. The floor was hers. "Mr. Speaker," she began, her voice even, "I rise today not to revisit what was shouted in a hallway or what was posted on a screen, but to ask this chamber one simple question." She looked up. Straight ahead, steady. "Do we know the difference between making noise and making change?" There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to let the words settle. In recent weeks, there has been an obsession in the media, not with policy, not with outcomes, but with volume, with who spoke the loudest, who refused to back down, who raised their voice, not who raised the standard. Her tone didn't rise. If anything, it dropped, leaning in rather than reaching out. I come from a community where we have always known the difference, where survival has never depended on how loud you are, but how clear, how focused, how committed. She placed her pen gently on the lectern. "Let me be clear. I did not walk away because I was afraid. I walked forward because I was already late to my next obligation, to serve the people who sent me here." A few murmurs, a cough, otherwise stillness. Courage is not volume, and restraint is not weakness. Our job in this body is not to provoke. It is to protect, not to perform, but to produce results that better the lives of those outside these walls. She paused again, then added, "If we want to be taken seriously by the people we serve, we must first act like we take this job seriously ourselves." Her voice cracked slightly on the final line, not with emotion, but gravity. She didn't flinch. She let it stay in the air. Then calmly, she stepped back. No applause followed. That wasn't the culture of the floor, but a few members shifted forward in their seats. A few nodded, not dramatically, just enough to show they understood something had been said. She walked back to her bench, sat, and folded her hands quietly in her lap. No one shouted. No one interrupted. And for the first time in a long while, the floor didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a place where something might begin again. She hadn't planned to say more. Her remarks were finished. The message was delivered. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had already begun to gather her things when something shifted in the room. Not loud, not visible, but undeniable. A pressure, the kind that builds when people are waiting for a question that hasn't yet been asked aloud. And she felt it. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her gaze from her notes and looked to her left. Across the chamber, seated beneath the stark glow of gallery lights, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She didn't smirk. She didn't speak. But her presence was loud in a way that needed no microphone. AOC turned toward her, not fully, just enough. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't square her shoulders. She simply said, "We're not afraid of debate. We just know when it's not worth having." There was no sound. Not right away. The words seemed to land without echo. Too heavy, too exact, too final for a quick reaction. It was like someone had drawn a clean line down the center of the room and then dared anyone to erase it. A few heads turned instinctively toward Greene, waiting for a flash of response. A quip, a scoff, anything. But she didn't move. Her jaw clenched slightly, but her eyes didn't lift. AOC didn't linger on her. She turned back toward the center, returned to her seat, and folded her hands, posture upright and unreadable. The silence lingered. Then slowly it broke. First came the sound of a chair shifting, then a pair of hands clapping, measured, firm. Another followed, then another. By the time the applause moved across the aisle, it wasn't thunderous. It wasn't staged. It was quiet. Real, like acknowledgement, not celebration. Even a few Republican members, those known for distance, not support, offered nods, a few joining in the applause with a hesitance that spoke louder than words. The speaker didn't interrupt. He let it breathe. Let the moment stretch. Because what had just happened wasn't about partisanship, it was about clarity. That one line, not worth having, didn't just challenge the quality of the noise that had defined the last month. It rewrote its purpose. It reframed the shouting not as strength, but as strategy. Not as courage, but as spectacle. And in doing so, it gave permission for others to question whether volume had ever been the measure of value. Outside the chamber, the moment replayed within minutes. The clip spread quickly across every major platform. It wasn't stylized. There was no soundtrack, no slow motion, just one camera angle, one voice, one line. Commentators on both sides paused. Some praised, some bristled, but most agreed. It landed. In classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms across the country, people began repeating it. We're not afraid of debate. We just know when it's not worth having. And for one rare instant in modern politics, it felt like silence had won. The camera didn't flinch. After Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez returned to her seat, the lens lingered, not on her, but across the chamber, where Marjorie Taylor Greene sat in her usual posture. Upright, arms folded, mouth pressed into a tight, unreadable line. But this time there was no smirk, no eye roll, no performative scoff. She didn't reach for a pen. She didn't lean into a whisper. She didn't rise. She simply sat. The silence, so often a vacuum for her energy, now seemed to contain her. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, there was no reaction, no retort, just stillness. One camera caught it perfectly, her eyes fixed not on AOC, but somewhere in the middle distance. Blinking just once, lips parting as if to speak, but stopping before sound could form. The moment passed. The chamber moved on, but the camera didn't. It cut, hard and fast, to a live shot outside the Capitol. It was dusk now. The marble steps glowed faintly under soft amber light. The crowd that had gathered was thinning, dispersing in pairs and groups, jackets pulled tight in the late wind. But one protester remained at the base of the steps, still holding up a handmade sign, cardboard, black marker, nothing elaborate. But the words were stark. Truth doesn't yell, it holds. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't chanting. She just stood there, arms steady, the sign swaying gently in the breeze like something anchored in conviction. A photojournalist caught the shot and uploaded it without a caption. Within minutes, it was everywhere, on social feeds, cable news teasers, even as a background image for op-eds from both the left and center. The message resonated, not because it declared war, but because it didn't. It redefined strength, not as force, but as foundation. By morning, that single image was trending in more places than any of Greene's livestream clips. Teachers printed it for classroom discussions. A church in Wisconsin posted it on their marquee. A columnist from the Wall Street Journal opened his column with the line, "Maybe the problem isn't that no one's talking. Maybe it's that no one's listening to the ones who refuse to scream." Greene, meanwhile, stayed off camera for the next 24 hours. Her office released no statement. The usual backers said nothing. Some didn't return calls, others said she was reviewing priorities. But insiders knew. Something had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but undeniably. The narrative wasn't hers anymore. And as pundits filled airtime, dissecting who won and who lost, many Americans had already moved on to a different question entirely. What if the real power isn't in dominating the conversation, but in knowing when to stop speaking and let the moment speak for itself? Inside the Capitol, the floor returned to its usual cadence. Votes were cast. Procedural motions resumed. But for those who had watched and truly watched, the image remained. One woman still, hands folded, eyes forward. Another woman silent, finally eyes cast down, unmoved not by fear, but by the weight of being out of rhythm with the country she claimed to speak for. And somewhere outside, a protester walked away quietly, sign under her arm, already halfway down the block, leaving behind only the echo of what the nation was just beginning to hear. The marble still shone. Months had passed since that day, since the echo of shouts, since the camera flashes and viral captions and split-screen outrage, but the hallway looked almost identical. Sunlight poured in from the high windows above, casting long rectangles of gold across the polished floor. The statues remained unmoved, quiet observers of the chaos that had once filled this space. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked slowly, hands folded at her waist, not in a rush. She moved like someone who remembered every detail, but wasn't haunted by them anymore. Her heels clicked gently against the tile, the only sound in the corridor. No voices trailed behind her. No raised tones broke the air. Just a light breeze through the stairwell and the distant hum of a copier down the hall. Behind her walked a young staffer, new, probably no more than 25, clutching a notebook and trying not to seem too eager, too awed by the space or the woman he followed. But when they reached the midpoint of the hallway, the exact stretch captured in every screenshot, every replay, every headline, he slowed his steps and looked around. Then he asked, carefully, sincerely, "Was that the scariest day?" Alexandria stopped walking, but didn't turn. Her eyes drifted to the far end of the corridor, where the elevator had once opened to swallow her from the noise behind. The memory came back not in sound, but in feeling, the stiffness in her shoulders, the pull of 1,000 unspoken expectations, the tightening behind her ribs as the hallway transformed into a theater she never asked to perform in. She took a breath, not deep, not heavy, just real. "No," she said softly. "The scariest day was almost believing I had to shout to matter." The staffer blinked, unsure if he was supposed to respond. But Alexandria finally turned to look at him, her expression calm, her voice steady. "Everyone expects women like me to prove ourselves with noise, with heat. They think if we're not yelling, we're not fighting. But shouting isn't always power. Sometimes it's a trap." The young man nodded slowly, his hand resting on the notebook he never opened. "I think you taught a lot of people that," he said. AOC offered the faintest smile, not one of victory, but of understanding. "It's not about being quiet," she said. "It's about choosing how you speak, who you speak for, and when to stop letting someone else set the terms of what strength looks like." They resumed walking. The hallway remained silent, but it no longer carried tension. It felt like something sacred had been reclaimed, not loudly, not with force, but with presence. As they neared the end of the corridor, two custodians passed in the opposite direction. One gave a polite nod. The other smiled and said, "Peaceful morning, huh?" Alexandria nodded. "The best kind." They stepped into the elevator. No cameras followed. No headlines waited. Just the echo of shoes on marble and the soft closing of metal doors behind them. And in the silence they left behind, the hallway remained exactly as it had once been. Only now, it belonged to her. The ring light blinked on with its usual artificial glow, but the frame it lit felt different now, emptier somehow. Marjorie Taylor Greene adjusted the camera, her face filling the screen with the same practiced angle, the same fixed expression. She took a breath, as if winding herself up, and hit "Go Live." There was no intro music, no graphics, just her voice, sharp and impatient. "I'm tired of the lies," she began, her tone already raised. "I'm tired of the left pretending they're saints when all they do is manipulate and divide. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doesn't speak for America. She speaks for anarchists, radicals, cowards." She waited for the flood of engagement to pour in, but the comment section was slow. A few emojis trickled through. A dozen likes. One "You tell 'em" in all caps. Then, quiet. Her words kept tumbling out. Familiar accusations, repackaged fury. She slammed the media. She blamed deep state Republicans. She questioned the patriotism of anyone who hadn't stood behind her in the hallway that day months ago. She gestured wildly, her voice bouncing off the walls of a room that now felt too big for the sound it held. But the numbers told another story. In the upper right-hand corner of the stream, the live viewer count hovered stubbornly below 1,200. For someone who once drew tens of thousands in seconds, it was a fraction, an echo of former noise, and the comments had changed. She's still on this? She looks tired. Didn't AOC already bury this with one sentence? She's out of breath. AOC won by standing still. Greene didn't react at first. Her eyes scanned the feed as she spoke, but her words started to lose rhythm. She repeated herself. She circled back to phrases she'd used 5 minutes earlier. Even the fire behind her voice seemed to flicker, still burning, but sputtering under its own weight. She reached for a note card beside her laptop, then discarded it without reading. "They want me to be quiet," she said, voice rising again. "They want me to disappear. But I'm not going anywhere, you hear me? I'm not going anywhere." But fewer people were hearing her at all. Even her loyal viewers seemed distracted. Replies came in, delayed, unfocused. Others dropped off entirely. A popular conservative blog didn't pick up the feed. A former media ally who used to share every clip posted instead about gas prices. The silence wasn't total, but it was spreading. Not dramatic, not final. Just cumulative. Greene's voice slowed as she reached the end of the rant. Her breath was audible between sentences now. Not because she was out of shape, but because something inside her was straining to keep the fire alive. She stared at the screen for a long moment before speaking again. Her voice at last dipped below its usual register. "They want me forgotten." Then quieter still. "But I remember everything." She looked straight into the lens as if expecting a final surge. A last wave of affirmation. It didn't come. A pause. Then her hand reached forward, hovering near the end stream button. She didn't slam it. She just tapped it gently. The feed cut to black. In the stillness that followed, there were no trending tags, no spin, no spark, just one quietly typed comment, left behind like a footprint in cooling ash. They stopped listening. The classroom was nothing extraordinary. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above. An American flag hung near the door. A shelf of well-worn civics textbooks leaned against the back wall. It was midweek in Pennsylvania, just after lunch. But something had changed. Painted in neat black letters above the chalkboard was a new quote. No fanfare, no signature, just a sentence that seemed to settle into the room like dust in sunlight. "You don't win with the loudest mic. You win by leaving behind a truth no one can ignore." The students noticed it immediately. A few whispered. Others stared at it silently, as if it didn't just say something, but ask something. Ms. Harris, the civics teacher, didn't point it out. She just let it exist. She walked to the front of the room, set down a worn stack of papers, and said quietly, "Today we're not doing a quiz. Today we're doing something else." She gestured to the wall. "That sentence," she said, "was said by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. After all the noise, after all the names and headlines and live streams, that's what she left behind." The room fell still. A boy in the back, usually restless, raised his hand. "Why didn't she yell back at the lady who attacked her?" Ms. Harris paused, then smiled gently. "Because some fights aren't worth echoing, and some truths get louder the quieter you say them." Near the window, a black girl in a denim jacket pulled out a notebook. She didn't say anything, but she began to write. 2 desks over, another student just nodded slowly, absorbing. The bell hadn't rung yet, but something in the room had already shifted. At the back of the class, a visitor sat quietly. She was part of a district civics initiative. She didn't speak, but her eyes never left the quote. She scribbled something down. "Legacy isn't what you shout. It's what people whisper after." The camera would never capture this moment. No reporters, no hashtags. Just a sentence on a wall and a room full of students who, just for a second, stopped scrolling, stopped laughing, stopped needing noise. The bell rang, but no one moved right away. One by one, they slowly packed up. Some looked back at the wall before they left. Others didn't, but they'd remember it anyway. By the end of the week, that quote would appear in 2 more classrooms. By the end of the month, it would be shared on 1,000 social posts, quietly without commentary. Just the words, standing still, and somewhere across the country, in an office in D.C., AOC would receive a photo in the mail. It showed that very classroom wall. Below it, written in pencil by a student, "I don't want to be the loudest. I just want to be remembered right." She smiled, said nothing, and turned back to work. This story reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. It often whispers through quiet conviction. AOC chose dignity over drama, purpose over performance. In a world where outrage gets views and volume wins headlines, her stillness became a louder legacy. It challenges us to rethink leadership. Is it the one who shouts loudest, or the one who walks away with grace and still makes history? Her story shows how silence, when rooted in truth, can echo far beyond the moment. What about you? Have you ever chosen silence when the world expected noise? Did it leave a bigger mark than you imagined? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Noah's Justice Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.